Good good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and hopefully not yet good night. I'm so delighted to join you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's my second visit to present to you all, and I can't tell you how enriching and wonderful this relationship is. So my topic today, as you can see, is bringing legal practice to life, and it's really, it should say, to life for law students, hosting guest speakers and alumni in the law school classroom. And it's not just guest speakers and alumni, it's guest speakers who are alumni and others, as you might guess. So let me make sure that uh, my slides advance. One moment again. Um, okay, hopefully this is going to behave. Um, no matter how many times I practice this, it seems to get the better of me. But I think it's going to behave now. I'm delighted. Okay. Um, so the advantages of hosting guest speakers in your classroom. Why do it other than, to take up time and that sort of thing? Well, to me, the first item with the stars is what I call the your child listens to someone else's parent more than to you approach. In other words, you're trying to teach a concept to your students and they think, oh, it's Professor Edelman again. And I've read the book and I've taken my notes, but she's just been teaching law school for 20 some years. And what does she know about practice? And then the way I think of it when I mentioned the parents before is, if you have a child or if you know a child, you'll know that the parent will say, child, please do such and such a thing. And the child will not be interested at all and will fuss about it and refuse to do it. And then they go to their friend's house where their friend's parent says, oh, why don't you kids do such and such a thing? And the child doesn't want to be rude and engages in that behavior or play with their friend. And then they come home and tell the parent, oh, wow, so and so's parent told me to do this, that thing that you always tell me to do. And you know what? It was really great. And so they're convinced indirectly that what you're saying has value. And I think that that's a great hidden purpose of having guest speakers in your classroom. You know that what you're teaching is relevant to what they want to do, what they want to practice, but maybe they need a little outside affirmation that that's true. So, to me, the number one reason is confirming the importance and relevance of what you are treating. It shows students also that mastering the subjects that they're working hard at and struggling with, perhaps, or not liking, are really important to their careers. It gives them the opportunity to network, in other words, to get to know alumni and the visiting attorneys who are always, in my experience, delighted to have students speak with them. It allows them to think about other areas of the law. We'll have somebody who comes in to talk about their general international practice, and they mention admiralty law or perhaps human rights law, and the student begins to think, oh, I should look into that. And it shows off your school to the guest speakers. So even if the speakers are alumni of your school, they get to come back and say, wow, the school has really changed and developed in the past 10 years or 20 years since I've been here. And oh, maybe I'd like to teach part time here or have some of these students come to my office. It also, the other hidden thing is it impresses students with your connections. Um, just recently and occasionally, I've taught art law before, and I happen to be friendly with two terrific people in the field. One of them is a lawyer who is in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Art Crime Squad. Sounds like a totally cool job, and it is. And the other is a federal prosecutor in Philadelphia who prosecutes art crime, including some very significant cases. So when they come in to speak to my students, instead of thinking, Professor Edelman, what are we going to learn today? They think, oh, Professor Edelman knows some pretty cool lawyers out there. So I'm going to pay attention. So again, it's having your speakers confirm your abilities and also confirm the importance of what you're teaching. So how do the speakers' points relate? And I'm going to talk about a number of things, considerations to have in mind, um, more reasons on why to have guest speakers and why to have particular ones and that sort of thing. So of course, you want the speaker's points to relate to your course. Now, you could have speakers multiple times in a course, or you could have them occasionally, or you could have them randomly. And of course, the students, you want them to leave the classroom saying, wow, now I understand international commercial arbitration practice more. That speaker, that speaker's comments were really relevant to that. Um, so you want to make sure that they do speak to that and you prepare your speaker ahead of time. But the students are also thinking, how will this help me get a job? How will this help me figure out what I want to do after law school? And if we have speakers, is Professor so and so still going to have enough time to teach me what I have to learn to do well in the final examination and the bar exam? So I think putting on two hats, your three hats, your professor hat, your host hat, and your if I were a student hat, helps you in planning these kinds of things. So the advanced preparation that I have students do is I tell them as far ahead of time as I can, who will be coming in. And it might have to do with a particular class, or it might have to do with a particular skill we're working on. One of the courses I've taught has been legal research, writing, and oral advocacy, a required first year course at all American law schools. And of course, that's a very general topic. But in one of my courses, I focus on international issues that arise in our state and federal courts. Concepts like forum nonconveniens, concepts like torts committed abroad or crimes committed abroad, because I'm so obsessed with teaching my students the importance of international comparative law. So for me, the what I try to emphasize to the students is having speakers who talk about the importance of learning the international or comparative law aspects of just being a divorce lawyer or a business lawyer or a tax lawyer. So ahead of time, I ask students to look at the website of the speaker and maybe Google around, see if there's any news articles about them, if they find any documents related to cases they've handled or work they've done. Take a look and take some time to think of a question or two. There's certainly not time for everyone to ask questions, but I want them to be prepared. Um, some of the when the speaker does come, I'll do another introduction. Uh, ask them to talk about how their interest in their area of practice developed, how their courses train them for success, which is of course my secret way of them conveying to our students that they should be attentive in law school. And then afterward, I get feedback from the students, usually with a little short survey, and often it's the speakers really opened up their eyes about something. Every now and then they'll say, well, this seemed off topic or less useful, but overall they feel stimulated to give positive responses. The other fun thing is to ask the speakers to respond. I'll give you a couple examples. When I asked the speakers their experiences, one said, I was incredibly impressed by your students, their receptivity, their abject fear, and their curiosity, all good traits for a lawyer, especially one who has an international practice. And another one I really liked, I was challenged to consolidate my experiences and hopes into a succinct presentation that could motivate others toward action. I gathered up resources and contacts and possibilities to share, which forced me to be more thoughtful about my own future movements. So I was thrilled with those kinds of responses. So Uh, that's a general background for it. But the next question really is, who should be your speakers? And my number one recommendation are alumni of your institution. And I'll talk more about that as we go on. But it helps to build connections for your law school, for your students, and for you as well. Attorneys active in the local, regional, and or national bar associations. At this point in your careers, you're familiar with these folks. Now, even if the structures of lawyer uh, gatherings or organizations is different where you are than it is here for me in Philadelphia, undoubtedly you have colleagues, former colleagues, and friends who have become judges, who have become active in politics, um, who are active advocates in human rights and commercial law and that sort of thing. When you bring them into your classroom, it really impresses your students. You can also bring in attorneys, and again, these can be alumni or just your friends from diverse areas and sectors of the law. So, for example, if you're teaching a course in commercial law, you can have you bring in private practitioners in different areas, in contract negotiation, in real estate, in tax. If you're involved in teaching public international law or some other sort of non-international public practice, bring in those involved in the public sector, bring in folks who might be involved in NGOs near you. And of course, what I'm going to get into in a moment too is nowadays it doesn't have to be someone near you. There used to be a time when I first had guest speakers where if I knew someone was coming in from out of town, for example, my environmental law alum who practices law in San Francisco, it was so exciting. I would have him come to the class. But that was only possible every now and then. Now, with Zoom and other types of software, it's possible anytime. And as you can see from us meeting here, where it's afternoon or evening or morning, um, it's so much more is possible now. So, who should be your speakers? These folks and speakers from out of town and abroad. Take advantage of this technology. You know it is here to stay. And as fabulous as it is to have guest speakers in person, taking advantage of technology is amazing for us in this field. And I'll tell you a couple of funny stories when I mention some specific speakers in a few minutes. Um, so invite alumni and experts, or again, friends from other areas to expand student knowledge. What is practicing environmental law in San Francisco like as compared to central Pennsylvania, for example? And how about speakers from abroad? When we join one another, we can talk about how do our litigation systems are so different. Some of our corporate practices, or many of them, are so different. What kinds of things should we consider if, for example, my client would like to buy real property in your country or vice versa? How do we engage counsel from abroad if we're counsel in the US and vice versa? All those sorts of things. So to give you some perspective, again, here is where I am. Okay. Hopefully you recognize this thing, even though it's cut off on this side, as the United States. And here's Philadelphia, not the capital of Pennsylvania, but hopefully the best known city to you, and a wonderful one where I would love to host you if you come to visit. And this is a close up. Right here is North Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, a bunch of other neighborhoods. Hopefully some of you have been here or will be here. And out here, 17 miles away, is my law school, Villanova Law School. So, about a half an hour drive or a half an hour train ride. Temple is up here. And then we have two others that we consider Philadelphia, Rutgers in New Jersey and Widener in Delaware. But this is the area we're talking about. And these are the distances that my school is um, from all of these places. And you can see we're almost equidistant between New York and Washington, D.C. So Philly, as we call it, has a very thriving legal practice. But a lot of people think about New York and Washington as being more thriving or bigger and more intense. And also, if you're teaching international concepts, you usually think of New York and Washington as the centers of those places. Well, one thing to report to you is that with respect to international issues, Philly is thriving as well. But let's say I want to have guest speakers from New York or Washington from their practices because they might be different from the ones in Philly. So often, and certainly pre COVID, people would come in from these other cities or elsewhere because it wasn't too out of the ordinary for them. And Philadelphia certainly as well. Having speakers from abroad was something else, and we had to use Zoom or other types of communication to have them in. But now, with people being cautious, with more people working from home, having folks Zoom in, and again, I just use Zoom loosely, it could be any software, um, makes a difference. Here's some examples of speakers um, that I've had. Alumni practicing in Africa, the UK, and China. I have a wonderful alum who was in Ghana, who works in the government there. I have a student, an alum who's practicing privacy law in the UK. And I have an alum who I'll mention on another slide as well, who practices international commercial arbitration in Shanghai for an Australian law firm. So if I'm lucky, I can keep straight where she is working. Alumni in Philadelphia. Why do I keep saying alumni? The students, if alumni come to speak, they send that secret message to students of you Villanova Law alum, you can practice law like I do. You can be a successful corporate lawyer, you can be a terrific litigator, or you can have an international practice here. You don't need to be in Washington or New York or California or wherever. Um, International lawyers in the Philadelphia area, there are plenty of people who are not alumni, of course, who who are in these kinds of fields. Visiting lawyers from France, I mention them because our bar association has a sister bar association with the Bar of Lyon, France. And every summer, lawyers in training from or law students from the Philadelphia law schools go to Lyon and work with firms and with corporations. And during the academic year, new lawyers from Lyon come to Philadelphia and sort of apprenticed with law firms here. So, what better than to have them come and visit our students and talk about what it was like becoming a lawyer in France and what their practice is like? And again, since I mentioned to you, my focus is on international practice. Sometimes I have a law school colleague. I have ones who have worked in the areas of international constitutional law, international criminal law, etc. Um, Let me just ask, I see is there a question in the chat? Okay, not yet, but feel free to put any questions that you have there. So let me give you some examples that I've had. Okay, come on. Alrighty. And uh, as again, remember, I'm teaching a generic legal analysis and writing course. And of course, I've taught art law. So here's an example of what I did in one semester. And it wasn't starting at the beginning of the semester, it was starting after the students were settled into their course. Um, Former chair of the Bar Association's International Law Committee, an alumnus in practicing refugee and asylum law with the federal government, an alum practicing, this is a fellow in the UK, practicing global data privacy law, who zoomed in from his office in London. Again, here's the next person who a young woman who I always have trouble tracking down who works in the Shanghai office of an Australian law firm. And during the pandemic, she was working in Eastern Europe. Fortunately, and she was working back home in the US as well. So, fortunately, technology has made us mobile. National security law, in house counsel, Fulbright scholars who may come to study at your or the equivalent in Europe, scholars who have come to study or work at your institution um, who can talk about their work. Some of the topics they've talked about, because in my writing course, we're talking about research, writing, and speaking skills. Again, this is like having someone else's parent um, speak to your child. Is you've talked about how important these skills are, but now you have someone else speaking about them and talking all about how crucial it is for you to develop those skills. So it's really great to have that emphasis. The other thing is that in class, you're generally having conversation with your students. And I know that some courses in Europe are more of a lecture style and some are more of an interactive style. And of course, the skills classes are more interactive between students and one another and professors and one another. Um, but here, you're often you're learning how to speak to your professor, to speak to your classmates. Here, when you have a guest speaker, they can communicate to you how to speak with colleagues, how you might have to speak differently with clients, and how you might have to speak differently with courts. And of course, there are many other audiences, but audience is another extremely important part of knowing your audience is another extremely important part of becoming an effective lawyer. Um, I think you can have speakers in any of these areas of law. There's just, if you want to have someone speak about arbitration, just even to educate you about it, you can always meet before the course or speak with the person. But if, for example, you're having trouble finding a visitor, invite someone else as well. You can also arrange and add into the person's visit, if it's a physical visit in person, a visit to meet some of your colleagues, perhaps sitting in on a meeting, perhaps meeting the dean, um, perhaps coming the same time that there's a special function like an award ceremony or some other kind of event at the law school or university. You can invite others from other schools at your university. Our business school, for example, is a natural since we do a lot of cooperative work. But you can do some of these programs together. So here are some more ideas too. So lectures can be about a particular areas of law, but you can do some other pretty interesting things with speakers who can even become colleagues of yours or co-colleagues. So you could co-teach with your visitor during a particular visit or during a couple of visits. For example, you could set something up where your visitor comes twice to your course. And during one of the visits, you talk about how to handle a particular strategy or negotiate a particular document. And they come back later. You share the results of the student's work with your speaker if they're willing to. And when they come back later in the course, they can give feedback. So that can be a really interesting thing to do. A couple of other things that I want to suggest, and I'm giving you links for this, are developing a co-taught course. So this is certainly another step beyond having a guest speaker. So for example, my colleague Cynthia Matson Adams in Indiana, central United States, has always been an advocate of international education and is in charge of that at her school. Last year, she developed and taught for the first time an international negotiation course. So instead of having just regular guest speakers, she co-taught this course with a professor in Hong Kong. Her students in Indiana handled one side of the corporate negotiation, and her colleague in Hong Kong um, students handled the other side. This required a tremendous amount of coordination And she was teaching her students at 7:30 in the morning in Indiana, which I think was in the evening for the other students. But it was still something terrific. The next one I think you are maybe familiar with because it's our friend Melanie Reed's courses in Tennessee. Um, After I met her via Elpis at Seals a couple of years ago, every week I attended her comparative criminal law course, which she taught online with her students in Tennessee and experts and professors and students from the former Yugoslavia. It was absolutely brilliant. It was something that could not have been carried on economically in in person, um, not with the two sets of students and two sets of professors. And plus, it was the beginning of COVID by the middle of the course. But she carried it on beautifully and has continued to create courses like this. So, again, not specifically a guest speaker, but a way of, you may, just like your students may discover some incredible connection with the guest speakers or develop a new idea about their possible interests in the practice of law, you can feel that way too and think, oh, I could do something else with this. And there's no end to the creativity that you could do. Um, a couple of other links that I've given you here are just general speaker series. Chances are your university or law school has speakers on some sort of regular basis. And these two law schools happen to have um, online information about their speaker series as well. A couple others I wanted to mention are the Rule of Law Initiative. For those of you who might be involved with this, it is not restricted by any means to US lawyers or law professors. But the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, or ROLI, has been around for, I think, 35, 40 years. And I'm happy to pass along sort of an anniversary link that they did, which I can send to you all afterward. But essentially, uh, it enables lawyers from all around the world to work together, whether it's developing curriculum for schools or working on a human rights problem or working on some kind of creative aspect of education or um, legal activity. And last year, for example, there have always been examples of teaching abroad, but last year, for example, um, when nobody could go abroad, I participated in teaching in at least three different countries via Roli and working with lawyers and professors from the other countries. The Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction, which handles exactly that sort of thing in the US, also has an interesting list of guest speakers available for remote teaching, which they didn't used to have. So that's something that you can peruse also. Let me stop for a minute. Are there any questions so far that I don't see you all on screen, so perhaps you could put something in the chat or just call out a question if you have something. Okay. Well, then I'm just going to give you a couple more slides and finish up a little earlier than I had expected. But the next slide you don't need to take a look at now. This is just my background. And then my final slide is a thank you. Um, and so I'm going to stop my share for now so that I can see you all and discuss this further. Um, the other thing is that I did publish a very short article on this a few years ago with the ABA, where some of the details I talked about are in here. But I'm happy to send it out again to share with you. So I know it's a short presentation, but I am happy to go on with this. Over the years, I have had many speakers, and it's always seemed to at least to put a smile on the face of my students. And again, engendered these intangible benefits. For example, having the guest speakers say, oh, I'm really glad to see the law school is doing this. This makes me proud to be an alum. Or I didn't know much about this law school, but this is really cool, and I'd like to be more involved. Could I meet the dean? Do you think that you might need an adjunct or part-time professor? I could develop something like this. So to me, the intangible benefits are wonderful, and the tangible benefits of having the students hear what you're teaching from someone else. And the other is networking. Students will come to me and say, Professor so and so is my advisor. Do you think I should ask him about this? I heard that he practiced in patent law with a law firm in California. And, what do you think about me talking to him? And I say to the student, your professors love being asked questions like this. It really makes them feel good and feel happy. Or they come to me and they say, wow, Michael Scullin, the a real person who was the Philadelphia's honorary consul until recently, Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware's honorary consul to France. So not a true diplomat, but an honorary diplomat who did lots of diplomatic work. Do you think I could talk to Mr. Scullin about doing that internship in Lyon over the summer? They feel so in awe of your guest speaker, but guest speakers are flattered by it. You might run across someone who doesn't have the nicest personality, I suppose, but hopefully you're just going to invite people who are lovely, either by Zoom or in person. And they are so touched to um, to be and they feel important. So that need wanting to feel important as a young kid or as a student, I think we all know that that lingers throughout our careers and our lives, and we want to feel good about ourselves. And so do our speakers. They may be very successful financially or great with clients, but having a student be interested in learning from them can be wonderful for them and also open up doors for students to have summer or permanent opportunities or to get involved with some sort of bar activity that can really benefit them. So, I encourage that tremendously. And again, introducing speakers to the deans and others who might be involved in their fields. My one funny story that I wanted to tell is that when my former student who was in Shanghai again, uh, working for an Australian law firm in Shanghai. I always have to keep it straight. Um, we Zoomed with her, and as you can imagine, it was very challenging to set up the time of day since they are so far ahead. So I think it was late afternoon in Philadelphia and early morning in Shanghai. And as our alum was sitting in her quiet, empty office, she didn't mind coming in early. The cleaning staff came in and started vacuuming loudly in the office. It was a big firm office. And it was just such a surprise to the students and to our speaker. And of course, it ended right away, and it wasn't anything too silly like a pizza delivery in the middle of but it just brought real life into the speaker's visit as well. Um, so that's really, what I have to say, and I'm happy to expand on it. I could always send you a more comprehensive list of the different folks we've had over the years, but it has been really enriching. And if you think about the 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 prominent alumni of your school who may still have time to do this, or the alums who are recent. For example, they just graduated, but they're already doing some terrific kind of thing. How positively they can influence your students. In terms of cost, I don't think this has ever cost us anything at all. It's just been someone donating an hour, maybe longer of their time, um, and they're speaking to a smaller audience. They're speaking to 20 people, or if it's a big class, maybe 100 people, and they're getting the exposure as well. um, we may have some school paraphernalia, whether it's a t-shirt or no autographed basketballs, which would be really great coming from my institution. But a t-shirt or a paperweight or a tote bag or something like that. We sometimes do, but it's really a very joyful, positive experience. And again, with Zoom, even though we're meeting from across the world, it's it's very personal. That we see each other's offices, we see each other's faces without masks, and and it's a great way of communicating. So those are my comments. I'm happy. I will be happy to send you my slides, and also I can send you a copy of the little article that I wrote, which was called, if I can find it, "Making It Real: Hosting an International Law School Speaker Series in the Legal Writing or Any Law School Classroom." So it's a low price, easy to set up, and very rewarding experience. And whenever I ask the speakers to come, they're like, "Oh yeah, great. When can I?"
Yeah,